This talk show is about conversations with influencers, industry disruptors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders with whom we want to have conversations on the topic of our interest. In this first episode, we bring together 4 amazing guests from all over the world who will share with us insights on inclusion and diversity and what they are doing to drive this in their agenda in the organization. Someone said that diversity is in being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. Research proves that diversity and inclusion in the workplace directly correlates to higher return on equity, more collaboration, more innovation, and a very sort of engaged workforce. So, can you share with us why diversity and inclusion is one of the key strategic initiatives for you and what you're doing to drive this agenda forward?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to give a fairly blunt answer as to why I care about it. It's a bit blunt, and I apologize in advance, and then I'll explain why. So I believe diversity and inclusion is relevant to us out of pure self-interest. I believe we will be a better company, we'll be a more attractive company, we'll be a more fun company, we'll make better decisions, we will look like the market we serve, and we will perform better as a result. And as you said in your opening comments, the data supports that, let alone the intuitive and empirical experience. I think we have to remind ourselves that diversity is not just about gender, it's about many aspects. It's about age, and I think we do very well on that. It's about ethnicity, and we do very well on that. If you just look around this office, you'll see it for yourself. It's around sexual orientation, which in some countries, including this one, can be a difficult subject, but it is about that. And it is also about your beliefs, whether they be creed or religion or others. It is also about gender. Now, on the gender side, I think we do relatively well at the bottom of the pyramid, and then we can talk about how we perform from there. In terms of inclusion, you mentioned that it's being invited to dance. If I can take that, I would change it slightly. It's feeling safe to dance. So, for example, I'm not a great dancer. When people laugh at me for dancing, I don't feel encouraged to dance. But when people encourage and make it safe, and it's part of the friends and family that you used to describe Ryan, it's safe to dance, it's safe to raise your voice, it's safe to contribute. That is the inclusion and the culture we're looking to foster.
We have Kate Barker. Kate, we met earlier this year at the Asian Women Leadership Summit, and it was really fascinating to sort of hear from you about your personal journey and all the disruption you've created in this part of the world. Would you care to share, from your experience, what it takes to really sort of drive the inclusion and diversity initiative, and how do we ensure as leaders, as well as us, in this room, that it does not just stay check in the box, but it's sort of truly, really implemented as well as taken forward?
Yeah, certainly around the level of diversity and inclusion, particularly around gender in this region, is phenomenal. And we're seeing a lot of traction happening across organisations as they start to lift their diversity and inclusion numbers. But where it really gets an impact across organisations is where the mindset of the senior leaders, and that prevails across the organisation. When we have a mindset of inclusion, it can be any form of diversity, and that's how we grow a cultural change within the organisation. It's deeply set on a series of values, and those values are really around a sense of curiosity, around a collaboration, around a cultural intelligence. And when we get to that stage, we see that it's not about KPIs or metrics or board positions. It's actually pervasive in how we behave. And when we do that, we see more organisational growth.
In that context, Ryan, how do you see, the core sort of beliefs and value systems important towards sort of building that inclusive behaviour and cultural mindset?
Yeah, we've talked about this quite a bit. I think values in underpinning people around the world is really what we all have in common. And actually, I think everybody has much more in common than not in common. And it's really those values that we all want to have a nice life, take care of our families, have a good career, and are honest and want to work hard. So you find the best people have those values, and both within Finastra, but also with our customers and interacting with our customers. So I think it's all about values, quite frankly.
Sure, and you have a very diverse team as well, and I know that you sort of personally believe in sort of building, leadership across gender, race, and culture as well. Could you share some of the steps you have taken?
Recently, when we just did a reorganization, I was able to take one of our top performing reps, Maria Lamposi, and by the way, it was so well deserving. She's been one of our top performing people within the organization. One of the programs that was implemented with the women in Finastra was mentoring, and I think it gave a lot of opportunity for women who haven't been mentored in the past. Gave them they've actually come and said, hey, would you mind mentoring? And then you should definitely find mentors if you don't have one, to develop your career.
Akbar, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I hope you had a good breakfast as well. How do you see that the cultural values are sort of ingrained and sort of become part of our daily lifestyle when we walk into Finastra?
I think the why is quite important, right, in the things we do. So understanding that diversity is, we want to focus on gender because that's the biggest one that we need to deal with, but having diversity of thought and diversity of ages, diversity of race is really what brings innovation.
What can be done at an organization level to sort of recruit women in leadership roles and then sort of get them to that C-suite level, as well as sort of coach and mentor them even to get to the board level?
Within this region, what's really inspiring is that while we may be later to the game around diversity and inclusion, the progress that they've made in this region significantly in the last 5 years, particularly about women, recruiting women into workforce, has increased significantly. But by being late to the market in this space, it means that we're not getting the senior level ranks that we should be at the executive level. Now, what we can certainly do is actually recruit externally senior level women into organisations to create that step change instantly in the organisation. That creates a sense of fellowship, creates a sense of belief in the organisation that they're valuing this. Certainly about proactively promoting women. We often find that women don't put their hand up for promotion. They'll be invited before they apply for roles, and they'll want to ensure that they're 100% successful for the roles. Well, we tend to find that men will be more confident and maybe only 80% of the skills. So instead of actually waiting for women to actually put their hands up, the ability to actually tap them on the shoulder and promote them perhaps further than they think they can get. So advancing those careers for individuals as well. And certainly we would say is that on a board position, 1 woman is a token, 2 is a buddy, 3 is impact. So we need at least 30%. So 3% to 30%, we have some way to go. And I say that is that any action we take now needs to be an exaggerated action to get that shift and change that we need.
Fantastic. And the impact perspective, Simon, question for you. Do you see, bringing in diversity at a board level?
Yeah, so I would echo what Kate said, 1, 2, 3. I love that. I'll borrow that language if I may. I would support it by saying that even more important is inclusion.
So Ryan, question for you. When you're looking at sort of your future leadership and the future talent that you're sort of building in your ever-expanding organization, what are the key sort of traits you look at, irrespective whether they are men, women, or any sort of race or culture?
So values, as I mentioned, are probably the most important thing for me. And then sort of how people approach their jobs and approach their professionalism on a daily basis and how they treat other people. I think empathy and high EQ is also quite important. And if you look at my top 10 salespeople, 5 are women, 50-50, but my organization isn't 50-50. So there's something to be said about really looking at the subject and making sure we have the right diversity, gender diversity, for sure.
Just to add to what Ryan said, it's not just 5 of the top 10, it's the top 5.
If we come back to diversity, for example, practical things you should think about, right? When you're hiring, when you're talking to a recruitment consultant, are you talking to them about diversity in terms of the pipeline, right? And because it is harder to find that diverse population, right? So I think, my ask is that get involved, get engaged, figure out what your role is in that, and make it happen. Become a lighthouse. Right?
How do we ensure that we are conscious of the fact that we have to be more inclusive and keep in mind that we have our own unconscious biases, but at the same time we do not sort of fall into that sort of mindset of creating reservations quotas, because then we're not hiring in recruitment and promoting based on skills and capabilities. And that's something we are sort of driving, that men, women, or across the races and groups, they're all same, equal, where they should be sort of judges on the basis of capabilities and skill sets. So Simon, any thoughts on that how do we sort of not get sucked into that sort of mentally putting in place some sort of reservation and quotas?
Yeah. So have no doubt, life is a meritocracy. Have no doubt, life is a meritocracy. Because you need to be conscious of being conscious. So if we have a role, and it's got 10 characteristics for the role to be successful, typically, and this is a generalism, but it's nonetheless a truism, a boy will say, I've got 5 of these, raise his hand and say, me, 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 me. A lady will look at this and say, I have 8 of these, I'm missing 2. Right? So the tap on the shoulder, the reassurance, the inclusion that you can raise your hand, I would like you to raise your hand, you are as meritocratic as the next person. This is not a reservation system, this is not a quota, it's awareness. It's awareness. It starts right there. Likewise, saying that you have a goal is not, for me, not having a goal would be abdicating responsibility. I think it's fine to say what good looks like. 1/3, 1, 2, 3, as you said, is a goal. It's not a reservation system, it's a goal. That's what we believe good looks like.
It was interesting because I share the same view around if I'm going to get promoted, I want to be promoted based on my capability and skills to do the job. I don't want a quota, and I don't want to take a seat on a board or a management team because they're trying to fill quotas. And what it does, coming back to Simon's point, is that there is a bias built into the system around how we make judgments for these decisions. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing now is a lot of technology that's taking out a lot of the bias out of this. So that's helping, certainly. But I am now a big believer going, actually, if women at senior levels could throw down the ladder for other women, mm-hmm. and I'm going to say, and men, mm-hmm. we can't do this without men, all genders, to actually bring up others along this path, I think that's when we try real leadership and a real level of inclusion.
You should really stop and think about what your criteria is, and is it a criteria that will be unbiased, right? Yeah. And I think that's really, really important.
Particularly around gender, when we talk about promoting women or tapping women on the shoulder and saying, actually, you can go for that role, I think it's something we should do, right? And I think that means being conscious of being conscious, right? And so I'd encourage us to do things like that. And when we do that at all levels, whether it's the executive level or the mid-level, because as folks rise through the organization, I think the mid-level is actually where we need to build a good pool so then we can promote up, right? So I'd encourage folks to do that. The other thing which I haven't done myself, which I do want to do and give it a try, is when you're hiring, try blind recruitment, right? Yeah. So cover up the name, cover up the date of birth, and look at the CV and try to figure out, would I hire this person, right? And that'll bring home, I think, a few things about hiring and diversity, right? Or maybe ask your recruitment agent, so just tell them, send me the details of the person without the name and without the age, and then assess the CV and then look at the name and the age maybe. And so I think if you can kind of embed some of these practical steps in, I think it will help change the makeup of the organization.
That's a great idea.
And that leads us to the point that we all have unconscious biases. I mean, I have gone through that training, and I know one of the things that came out when we were having those discussions was that intrinsically, when you have an extroverted woman and she is ambitious and she sort of wants to drive it forward, they are typecasted as being aggressive, being over-ambitious. Whereas if men have similar traits, they are called charismatic, magnanimous, wonderful, personality. How do we sort of be aware that this unconscious bias exists, but still not sort of be aware of it and not sort of get sucked into it?
Authenticity and starting with empathy and just being proud of yourself.
So it's about building rapport. It's about building relationships and establishing that. So I think the ability to find common ground for how we apply. And part of that is being agile in your own style. So being able to flex in different needs and different people that you engage with. Coming from a solid ground of authenticity at your core, but the ability to be adaptable in those sorts of circumstances. And it's that flex that we have in our style that sees us grow through our levels and senior levels in our career as we come across different people. And Simon talked about the board. When we're able to flex our style, we're actually able to understand through their lens what's important to them and have that empathy.
One of the things, I picked up last week was, when especially for women or say single parents, be it male or female, it's important to have a good sort of support network internally and externally. And now that's something you have to build it yourself, somebody who will sort of cover up for you, either at home or at work, for you to be able to achieve the goals that you have sort of put in place. We are going to now open up the Q&A with the audience. So, Miktil?
But according to an article that I've read on pride.kindness.sg, where they talk about the gender inequality in Singapore, being a problem. Now, one of the major obstacles that women face when they progress in their career is the unequal distribution of the parent responsibilities. So last year, about 300,000 women needed to move out of the workforce due to that, where only 12,000 men needed to do the same. So how, in many cases where the equal distribution of caregiving responsibilities cannot be equal, in the case of a single parent, could you provide some examples on what the company is doing to also provide equal opportunities for those, to support a framework around it?
So I'll give you two examples, and they're very recent and very eye-opening for me. So one is in the Philippines and one is in Tel Aviv. So when I moved into the CEO role, the first thing I did was get on a plane and go and see the population that I'd been less exposed to, the development centers, the product managers, the QA people, and so on. So in the Philippines, we were talking about whether we should take more space. And I started saying, okay, so what do we really need the space for? And then one of the ladies said, well, we need space for breastfeeding. A lot of us are young mothers. And the guys looked and said, but you never told me that, right? So many of the boys just actually didn't know. I mean, EQ, IQ, but we don't actually know what we don't know, right? We don't actually know what we don't know. So they needed some intimate privacy rooms. They needed the ability to have a crash. They needed a nursery. You asked me and challenged me earlier, why don't first-time maternity leavers come back? Well, kind of maybe there's part of the answer. The other example was 3 days later in Tel Aviv, and I was hosting the Women in Finastra meeting, and the lady made your point. She said, my manager always makes the meeting at 5 p.m. and I've got to pick up the kid at 4:30. And the manager said, I never even thought about that. Right? We literally don't know what we don't know. Why can't we move the 5 p.m. meeting to 2 p.m.? So, men need to be more aware, right? Spark a little bit more cognition, right? And if we don't, give us some feedback, because honestly, we don't know what we don't know. We really don't. But then the point is inclusion. It should be safe to talk about breastfeeding and intimate spaces. It should be okay to say, please don't make that meeting at 10 because you make it really hard for me. They hadn't raised their voice and the men had not listened, and it's a two-way street here. And yet it was that simple to solve.
Yesterday I had a very interesting discussion with my daughter in the context of the super typhoon. She asked me, Dad, what are you doing to stop the climate change? And I said, there are many ways you can help save the world. For example, you may be in a position to influence financial inclusion, and therefore you may be able to help those people affected and the businesses to recover faster. Today, we also talk about all these different values on behalf of the company. So you spoke in the interview as the CEO of Finastra. My question is, which of those values is dearest to your heart as a person, as Simon?
Yeah, so I prefer the first part of your question. Yeah, so the second part of the question is which value is most important? And that's like choosing between your children, right? So values are values, right? So you'll notice, for example, we don't use the word integrity as one of our values, because integrity is something we expect you to come with. That's something that's given to you by your family, by your education, by your religious background. It's something you have or don't have. It's table stakes to join. The values for us are equal. But the first part of your question is, for me, one of the biggest missing links, which is purpose, right? Purpose is the predominant driver of why you do something. It is the why. Akbar was talking about it earlier, the why. So when we talk about Mission 2021, to me it's a little bit heartbreaking that we talk about these are the reasons why we're uniquely privileged, and we're going to be the #1 open platform, and these are the 5 things we've got to get right, and these are the 10 strategic initiatives led by the 4 decision framework pillars. But everyone forgets to go right back to the beginning and say, why are we doing this? The why we're doing what we do, the why you get out of bed in the morning, the why your daughter's eyes opened is because we aim to unlock the potential of people and businesses everywhere. And that's a beautiful thing. We aim to bring tens of millions of people into financial inclusion. We aim to help resolve the $1.5 trillion trade financing gap for SMEs. We aim to make 2008 resiliency never occur again. Right? We aim to improve people's lives.
While we appreciate and are fully on game for this 2021 mission and diversity and inclusion as well, how does this reflect on our financial books? What is our expectation in terms of these values that we are bringing in?
Yeah, so from a financial perspective, right, what we aspire to do is become the best in class right, financially. And what does that mean from a very practical perspective? So there's an index which we use, which is essentially our EBITDA margin, which is our profitability, plus our revenue growth, which gives a number, right? And the best performing companies in the market usually have a range between 40 and 50%, right? And it's our ambition to be, in 3 years' time, at the higher end of that index, right? That means we are a really excellent performing company. We're actually a very good company today. You know, if I step back and I look at our revenue, we look at our kind of diversity of portfolio and the profitability we have a very good business here, right? How do we make it an even greater business? So financially, that's our target as part of Mission 2021. One of the things I will say is, though, if you look at our midterm plan, right, which is our financial plan, we have not factored in some of Mission 2021, right? So let's talk about that. For example, Lender.com that I talked about earlier, which is this new marketplace, right, which has great opportunity to capture value from the industry, right? Is that in our midterm plan? No, because it's a new model and we're still trying to figure out where that's going to take us, right? Data monetization, right? If you look at the amount of data that sits within our systems that financial services process, right? There's a huge opportunity, right? Is that within that growth target? No, that's an opportunity for us to go grab, right? So there are 3 or 4 things within Mission 2021. If we execute together, will really make this above and beyond an excellent company. Our midterm plan kind of gets us to an excellent company, right? But we really have the opportunity to move the market, right? And the opportunity is now.
Like I said, and I'm going to add 2 examples. Okay, so nothing makes you feel better when you go at home having done the right thing. If you go home and speak to your children and say, you know what, we made an extra $1 million today, or you went home and say, hey, I did the right thing today, it's a completely different feeling. So let me give you 2 examples. 18 days ago, last day of the quarter, the sales leader for community markets in the United States rings up and said, listen, the customer's holding us ransom to this condition or they won't sign the contract. So I said, so what do you want to do? And they said, well, I need this deal to make the number. And I said, well, do you think it's the right thing to do? And there was a long pause and he said, no, I don't think it is. And I said, so make the decision. If you want to decide that you need to do this for your quarter, then do so. But if you want to do it next week, when the temper is off and the pressure is off, I've got your back. Right? And he said, okay, I'm going to make the decision. I'm not going to do it. Example 1. Example 2, in community markets, right? And we have to take the heat and the board for that, but it was the right thing to do. Example 2, and you'll see this, right? There was a team, and they were in an abusive situation with the customer in pre-sales. And the customer was screaming and shouting, you've got to come in on the weekend, and just being awful. And they rang me up saying, Simon, what do we have to do? And I said, well, if this is against our values, right, and there's no choice of them, they're equal, this is against your values, I'm not sure we want this relationship, right? If it's like that in the process of getting married, imagine what it's like after you share rings. So they thought about it and said, this is a permanently value-broken relationship. And I said, but then you should step away. Then you should not go through the process of getting married. Vendor is the second most disgusting word in the English vocabulary. The first you can choose. The second is vendor. I don't want to be a vendor to anybody. Right? So we're starting to find our confidence because our business is becoming so recurring that we can start to say no elegantly and do the right thing. The right thing will always pay back. It will always pay forward.
And I'd add one story. I mean, in my background, I've gotten calls from people in the professional services organization, and they're being abused on site by an awful person with the wrong values. And I've called very high and said, look, you can't treat our people like this. You don't expect us to treat you like that. And and it gets dealt with very quickly by customer companies. So you're part of this as well, and speak up.
Yeah, maybe a different angle of it too is I've been a leader of a team when I was living in New York. We came across salaries, and we were up for promotion period, and I noticed that the women were all paid below scale, and the ones that were being promoted were going to be paid lower than the next bracket moved up. So I worked with finance, and we created a financial model to actually put together what the salary bands should be and the salary roles would be. And there were some significant increases. I took that to what was the exec team at the time. They took that to the board. And while it was an overspend, certainly it got through. And I was adamant that I wasn't going to let this case go down. So absolutely I think I was in week 8 with the organisation at the time. And certainly if I was going to have a voice about anything, I knew I had my first 90 days to do it, and I chose this as the topic.
Do you guys think that a generation gap actually plays a part or is a significant challenge alongside perhaps like gender and education background?
So I think there's always been a gender gap. I remember when I was young and starting my career, you know, I had a view of myself versus I'm sure of the people who are now my age looking at me in my career. But the program's all really designed to bring young people into the organization, give them the tools and the exposure to start growing themselves and be successful in their careers. So is there a gender gap? Probably there is, you know. But I think that's what the program's designed to do, is to give you the tools to start being successful within the organization and give you the foundation. Because, you know, what we don't want to do is bring someone with no experience in, who's smart and energetic, and just throw them into an organization. We forget about them, and then all of a sudden you're getting frustrated because no one's actually giving you the framework and the enough experience to be successful. So that's what this program's all about. So a 2-year program, and then our hope, and I'd much rather have someone be promoted within than going exterior. So you get, you know, as you go through the process, you're asked and get the opportunity to do greater things within the company.
So Kai, I'll add to that. So I'm going to ask you a favor, which is, do me a favor, which is, there's an article in the Financial Times today by an Australian author, and he wrote a book about a decade ago, and the title is memorable but also rude. And the title is Move the F On, It's Our Turn Now. Do you know this book? It's about Australia. I didn't hear about it. No. So apparently it was a very famous book. He wrote it when he was 24 years on. So the Financial Times rang him up, it's 10 years later, and said, so about the generation gap, what are your thoughts now that you're older? Is it time for you to move on? And he said, well, no. Right? Surprise, surprise. He said, well, no, I've learned in the last 10 years that actually age matters. Age is another form of diversity. Age matters because it brings institutional knowledge. It brings domain expertise. It brings the experience. And by the way, experience is the word we give to the mistakes that we've made, right? That's what experience means. So he's starting to realize at age 34 that his views when he was 24 were maybe a little bit too strong. So if you can find that article, send it round to the office, because it's a great example of diversity.
What is interesting, having studied demographics now for the best part of 8 years in our workforce, what we're seeing is Gen Z come through in larger numbers than Gen X ever before. And we're seeing our first round of CEOs of Gen X, so I should say Gen Y, coming through. So Gen Y coming through as CEOs of large organisations, creating and setting the tone for the future, which is phenomenal, knowing that the majority of our workforce, particularly in this region, is going to be the millennial Gen Y. Now, in being able to manage a whole range of age groups, gender, demographics throughout the organisation is going to be key. And I think how we tap in and leverage and understanding our insights and the value we all bring is where it's going to be. And that's going to be even key for the future CEOs of how well they orchestrate that.
I'm going to ask the fantastic panel over here to think of one word that you believe sort of totally symbolizes the effort we are making towards inclusion and diversity, or the effort you would want to make towards inclusion and diversity.
Infect the others with your enthusiasm and your competence. That would be my ask.
And I would say it's progressive.
I think you need to make it a personal priority.
Well, what I would say is my 2 words would be get involved.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the esteemed panelists over here. Wonderful audience, very engaging discussions. So let's be more open, be inclusive, and let's all dance in this safe environment that we have.
At 20, Kai, you be my mentor. You mentor me. So and this is a very uncomfortable experience for us both, by the way, right? Right? Because you say, hey, Simon, you look like a middle-aged, stale, male-impelled kind of guy, and you're boring on Facebook and you're absent on Twitter. You tell us some home truths which are home truths. So, for example, when I was growing up, you'd have this notion of offices where you'd bring your kids' days, and you bring your kids, right? In technology, you have a day where you bring your parents. Right? And you show them what you're doing on machine learning or artificial intelligence, and you explain all the reasons why you're not a doctor, right?